My name is Warren Novick, and the day the call came through, I was 3 fingers into a bottle of grain alcohol I'd cooked myself in a recycler unit that wasn't rated for it. The shack I lived in sat on the back end of a refueling station nobody used anymore, 2 jumps out from the old trade lanes. On a rust-colored rock, the navigation map still listed as Bedford Flats, Provisional Human Settlement, status unverified. The fleet had left us behind 11 standard years ago. Half the colony went with them. The other half stayed because we were too broken, too stubborn, or too wanted to climb on board. I was all 3. I had been a salvage hand once. I had been a husband once. I had been a man with a working liver and a clean record and a pair of hands that did not shake. None of that survived the rim. The rim takes pieces of a man one at a time, and it does not give them back. By the 11th year, I was a thin thing in a coat that smelled of solvent, with a beard I cut with kitchen shears and eyes I did not look at in the recycler glass. I knew what was in the glass. I did not need to be told twice. The transmitter chimed once. I almost didn't answer. I sat there with my elbows on the metal table and watched the chime light blink and listened to my own breathing, which was the loudest sound in the shack, and I thought about how easy it would be to never know what was on the other end. The shack had a single bulb, and the bulb buzzed, and the buzz was the second loudest sound. There was a third sound under both that I had learned to ignore, a low wind that moved through the seal of the door at all hours, and that on bad nights sounded like a man trying to whisper through a closed mouth. The shack had been built for 2. I had lived in it alone for 11 years. I tapped the panel. It was a lawyer, some woman speaking from a clean office on a clean station, with a wall of green plants behind her that I knew weren't real because nothing was any more. Her hair was the kind of gray that costs money. Her collar was starched. She did not look at me with disgust, which was the first thing I noticed. People who look at the rim with disgust at least know what they are looking at. She did not. She looked at me like she was reading a file. She said a name I hadn't heard in 15 years. She said the woman attached to that name had died in a shuttle decompression on a routine transit. She said I had a daughter, 11 years old, living on a relief habitat near the inner rim. The mother had named me on the registry. I was, in the language she used, the surviving registered parent. I poured another finger and drank it without taking my eyes off the screen. The drink burned a line down the middle of me and settled cold in the bottom of my stomach. The lawyer waited. She had been trained to wait through silences. She would have been good in a confessional. She would have been good in a hostage line. "Mr. Novick," she said, "the child needs a guardian." I asked her what the child's name was. I had not meant to ask. The asking came out the way drinking came out, without permission. She told me. The name was a name the mother and I had argued about 15 years ago in a kitchen on a habitat that no longer existed. The mother had won the argument. I had not known she had won. I had not been there for the winning. I told her I'd get there. I don't know why I said it. The words came out the way bullets come out of a barrel, not from thinking, just from the mechanism finishing what someone else had started. I closed the channel and sat in that shack for a long time. The bottle drained itself. The light outside went the color of dried blood, which is the color it always went on Bedford Flats around what passed for evening. The 2 moons we had came up over the ridge like 2 cataract eyes looking at me. I packed a duffel. I packed the pistol my brother had left me before he flew out with the fleet and never wrote. The pistol was a colony-issue sidearm, not a fancy gun, but my brother had carried it on 3 salvage runs and brought it home each time, and the grip had worn smooth where his hand had sat. I packed the last of my pills, the ones that took the shake out of my hands when the drinking started to leave me. The bottle was nearly empty. I had 4 pills. I would need more inside the week. I would worry about that on the freighter. I packed nothing else worth packing. The shack didn't have anything else worth packing. I walked to the depot just before second moonset. The depot was the only thing in Bedford Flats with working lights. The locals were already gathering for the festival. I'd been on the moon 11 years and I'd never paid the festival much mind. It happened every season turn. The town hung banners across the main strut, dust orange and bone white, with sigils on them I'd never bothered to learn. Children ran around with little carved figures in their fists. The figures had 2 legs, and antlers and faces I didn't recognize as faces. The man behind the depot counter was Sheriff Burnside. I knew him by name because everyone did. He ran the only law on the rock, which mostly meant he ran the only law that mattered. He was a heavy man, slow-moving, with eyes the color of cold tea. He never raised his voice. I'd seen him put down a fight once by walking up to 2 drunks and just standing between them. They'd dropped their fists on their own. "Warren," he said in that flat way of his, "long way from your shack." "Need a transit pass," I said. "Off-world, soon as the next freighter." He looked at me for a moment, just looked. Then he punched something into the panel under the counter and said, "Festival's tomorrow. Freighter window opens after. You can wait it out at the hotel. On the town." I should have heard it then. The way he said "on the town." The way his eyes didn't move from mine. But I was sober enough to want a drink and drunk enough to take a free room, and I nodded, and I took the chit he slid across the counter, and I walked out into the dust. That was my first mistake. There were going to be others. I drank that night in a place called the Wachowski Boys Bar. The bar was the only building on Bedford Flats with real wood inside it, hauled in from somewhere off Rock 50 years back, dark-stained and oily and worn smooth at the counter edge by 1,000 drinkers' forearms. There were 3 Wachowski brothers, and they all served at the same counter. Mickey poured, Charlie collected, and the youngest one, Junior, they called him, though his real name was Charles too, sat at the end and watched. Junior was the only one who looked at me like I was meat. The other 2 looked at me like I was a customer. Junior looked at me like he was counting the parts. I drank and I watched the festival come together through the window. They were building a structure on the main strut. It looked like a stage, but it wasn't a stage. It had no front. It was a frame, 4 uprights and a crossbeam with hooks set into the crossbeam at even intervals. The hooks were big. The hooks were old. The hooks had stains on them the dust hadn't been able to lift. Children were running rope around the uprights, weaving banners in. They worked fast and they worked quiet. The kind of quiet that comes from doing a thing every year for a long time. One of them looked up at the window and saw me watching, and held my eye for a beat too long, and went back to the rope. A man 2 stools down from me followed my eyes and said, "First time you've stayed for the hunt." He was an old man, or what passed for old on Bedford Flats, leathered, thin-lipped, with a drink in front of him he wasn't touching. I had seen him before in the strut. I had never spoken to him. I told him I was leaving after. He smiled with half his mouth. "Sure you are." He turned his glass a quarter turn on the counter. "I said that the first year, said it the second year too, said it about a year and a half ago last time when I packed a bag." He picked up the glass and put it down again without drinking. Bag still by the door. I asked him what he meant. He looked at me, just looked. The way Burnside had looked at me at the depot. The way Junior was looking at me right now from the end of the counter. The way they all looked when I started to pay attention. Then he said, very softly, "Drink your drink, son. Don't make them look at you twice." I drank my drink. I did not look at the end of the counter. I felt Junior's eyes anyway, the way a man feels a draft on the back of his neck. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay on the hotel bed and listened to the festival sounds rolling in through the thin walls, drumming, low and steady, not the kind of drumming you dance to. The kind of drumming you march to. The kind of drumming that's been used to march men somewhere they don't want to go for longer than there have been drums. Somewhere around 3rd hour my hands started to shake. I took the last of my pills. I told myself I'd find more on the freighter. I told myself a lot of things. They came for me at dawn. The door didn't break. Burnside had a key. He walked in with 2 of his deputies and Junior Wachowski behind him, and he said, "Warren, on your feet." I went for the pistol. Junior had it before my hand reached the duffel. He grinned at me with all his teeth, which were small and even and very white. He said, "Morning, Drifter." Burnside read me a charge. He read it from a sheet of plastic paper in that same flat voice. The charge was something about transporting controlled substances across a colonial line, which I hadn't done, and being a known associate of a meth chemist named Bo Dog, which was true but had been true for 10 years without anyone caring. The charge didn't matter. The charge was just the paper. The paper was for the cameras the town didn't have. The paper was for the part of Burnside that needed to believe he was still law. They walked me out into the strut. The whole town was there. The structure I'd seen the night before now had a banner hanging from the crossbeam. The banner had words on it in the old human script and words underneath in a curling, segmented script I'd never seen. Both said the same thing I'd learn later. Both said happy hunting. That was when I understood that the town wasn't human anymore. I'd been on Bedford Flats 11 years and I'd never looked close. The Wachowski brothers were the right shape. Burnside was the right shape. They all walked on 2 legs and they all wore hats and they all spoke the trade tongue with a flat colonial drawl. But standing in the strut that morning with the sun coming up red over the ridge, I saw them in their festival skins. The hats came off. The faces underneath had 2 extra ridges I'd never noticed because I'd never wanted to notice. The teeth were too even. The eyes had a second lid that flickered sideways when they blinked. Burnside's hands, when he pulled off his gloves, had 4 fingers and a thumb that bent the wrong way at the second knuckle. He'd been wearing prosthetic gloves for 11 years. They all had. The Hesht. I'd heard the name on shortwave once, years back, from a freighter pilot who'd come through drunk and left sober and twitching. He'd said the Hesht were a rim people. He'd said they didn't trade. He'd said they took. The Hesht didn't take, they hunted. Burnside stepped up on the structure under the crossbeam. His voice carried without him raising it. Citizens of Bedford Flats, he said, and his second eyelid flickered, the season has turned. The herd has been culled of the unwell. The ranks have been ordered. The hunt fathers have spoken. He looked down at me. This one comes to us a known carrier of poison, a waster of his own flesh, a father who abandoned a calf, amoral by our reckoning and yours. He has been given a name, and the name is meat. The crowd made a sound I will not forget. It wasn't a cheer. It was a low 3-note hum, the same 3 notes from each throat, rolling up the strut like a wave. Burnside looked at me. His eyes were not unkind. That was the worst part. You have a head start, Drifter, he said. 2 hours by your time. After that, the hunt fathers ride. You go past the western ridge, you live another day. You stop, you die where you stand. Are the rules understood? I didn't answer. He nodded as if I had cut him loose. Junior cut the binding on my wrists with a knife that wasn't a knife. It was a tooth set in a handle. Hesht make their blades from their elders' jaws. I learned that later, too. Run, Warren, Junior whispered, and he licked his upper lip with a tongue that was a little too long. Run hard. I ran. I ran out of the strut and past the depot, and through the gate the town never bothered to close and onto the flats. The flats were 3 days wide on foot if you knew where the water cisterns were. I didn't. I'd lived on this rock 11 years, and I'd never crossed the western ridge because the western ridge was where the storms came from, and only fools went out there. The 2 hours of head start I had were a joke. They were going to ride me down inside the first day. I ran anyway. I ran because my daughter was on a relief habitat near the inner rim, and I had told a lawyer in a clean office that I'd get there, and the mechanism that fired those words was still firing. I ran because my hands were shaking, and the only thing that stops the shake when you're out of pills is movement. I ran because Junior had whispered run hard like a man placing a bet, and somewhere in the part of me that hadn't drowned, yet I wanted him to lose. The first hour, I covered ground. The flats sloped down into a basin of red gravel and old riverbed. I kept the sun on my left shoulder, which was the only direction I knew that wasn't back. I picked up a length of pipe from a wrecked harvester and put it in my belt loop because I had nothing else. My duffel I'd left in the hotel room. My pistol was in Junior's hand. The pipe was 3/4 inch, hollow, sealed at both ends with a hex cap, the kind of length you'd find on any hydraulic line in any colony. I gripped it once and shifted it twice, and the grip felt right. A length of pipe is not much against a long rifle. A length of pipe is something. When a man has been carrying nothing for 11 years, a length of pipe is a great deal. The wind came up at the bottom of the basin and pushed the dust east. The dust covered my tracks behind me, which was a small mercy I noted and filed. Then I noted that it was the wind that came every season turn, which meant the Hesht had picked the festival's date in part because the dust would erase the prey's trail and lengthen the hunt. They were not stupid. They had not been stupid for a long time. They had been farming this rock and its weather and its drunks for 11 seasons, and they knew every cistern and every gully better than I did. And the only thing I had that they did not was that they did not know that yet. The second hour the shaking started for real. Withdrawal doesn't ask permission. It moves into the bones and lights a slow fire there. My vision narrowed. My breath got short. The fire in the bones is a particular kind of fire. It goes up the long bones first, the femurs and the humerus, and then it pools in the joints, and then it climbs the spine one vertebra at a time. I had ridden it before. I knew the shape of it. I knew it was going to get worse before it stopped, and I knew it would not stop until I either drank or slept for 2 days, and I was going to do neither. I sat down twice on the riverbed gravel and stood up twice. The second time I stood up, I heard them. The horns. The Hesht use a hunting horn that sounds like a wounded animal calling for its mate. They learned it from prey they killed 200 generations back. The horn echoed off the basin walls and came at me from 3 directions at once. I didn't know if there were 3 of them or one of them being clever. I started moving again, not running anymore. The running was over, moving. The first one came up on me at dusk. He came on a 6-legged mount, a long-necked thing with a ridged spine and a mouth that hung open. The rider was small and lean and not Burnside. He had a long rifle across his back and a coil of rope on his saddle. He came at a trot, easy, like a man going to fetch the post. He'd seen me already. He'd been seeing me for an hour, probably. He wanted me to know he was coming. I went flat in the riverbed. The gravel was the same color as my coat. I pulled the pipe from my belt loop and laid it under me. I waited. He passed 20 meters away. The mount's feet made a soft chuffing on the gravel. The rider scanned. His second eyelid was open and his first eyelid was closed. He was hunting on the second sight, the Hesht heat sense. I'd heard the freighter pilot talk about it. The pilot had said the Hesht see warm bodies through stone. He'd said it like a man warning you about a storm. The rider passed me and didn't see me. I lay in the gravel a long time trying to understand. Then I felt it, the shake, the withdrawal. My body was cold. My core temperature was running 10 degrees below where a healthy man's would be. The poison I'd been drinking and the pills I'd been taking and the 4 days since I'd eaten anything but a heel of bread had turned me into something his second sight couldn't read. I was running cold. I was running so cold I read as gravel. I lay there and I laughed, not a real laugh, a dry one, the kind that hurts the ribs. The Hesht hunt warm prey. They'd been hunting warm prey since their first ancestors came down out of whatever tree they came down out of. Their entire sport was built on the assumption that anything alive ran hotter than the stone it stood on. And here I was, a half-dead drunk on a rock at the rim of nothing, who'd been killing his own body so slowly and so thoroughly that he dropped below their floor. I waited until the rider was out of earshot. Then I crawled. I crawled west along the riverbed. I crawled on knees and elbows for 2 hours because every time I stood up the horn came again and the horns were close. The second moon came up. The flats turned silver. I crawled past a cistern I would have died to find an hour earlier, and I drank from it on my belly like an animal. The water was cold and full of grit, and I held it in my mouth a long time before I swallowed because my throat had forgotten what swallowing was. The cistern saved me. The cistern also told me something. The cistern was old, human-made from the colony days. The Hesht hadn't filled it in. They hadn't poisoned it. They were leaving the flats useful. They weren't killing the moon. They were farming it. I understood, lying there next to that cistern with the silver light on my hands, what Bedford Flats was. Bedford Flats was a hunting preserve. The Hesht had taken the colony 11 years ago. Quiet, no broadcast, no distress call because Burnside had been wearing his prosthetic gloves and reading his flat-voice charges and signing off on every transit through the depot. The fleet had left and the Hesht had moved in, and the few humans who stayed had been folded into the herd. We were the prey stock. Every season turn they picked one of us. The amoral ones, the drunks, the chemists, the fathers who'd run out on their kids. Bedford Flats had a long memory and a longer list, and the list had my name on it. I was the 11th. I think about that sometimes. 10 of us had run before me. 10 human beings I'd shared a bar with, walked past in the strut, nodded to at the depot. 10 of us had been culled and hung on the hooks under the crossbeam, and the rest of us had kept drinking. We hadn't asked. We hadn't looked. I lay by the cistern and I thought about my daughter on the relief habitat, and I thought about the lawyer with her fake plants, and I thought about how easy it would be to lie down in the gravel and let the shake take me. Then I thought about Junior Wachowski licking his upper lip and saying run hard like a man placing a bet, and I stood up. I stood up cold and I started walking west. The second one I killed. He came on foot. Probably the youngest of the Hunt fathers, sent to flush me toward the others. He came up the riverbank in the dark, head down, second eyelid open, and he walked right past me where I sat with my back against a boulder. He passed me at arm's length. I could smell him. Hesht smell like wet iron and dried lichen, a smell that doesn't sit anywhere on the human nose, a smell that makes the back of your throat want to close. I let him pass. I let him take 3 steps past me, because the closer he was to passing, the less his second sight would be aimed at where I was sitting. Then I stood up, and I broke his neck with the pipe. It took 2 strikes. The first one staggered him and turned him toward me, and he saw me with his first eyelid for half a second before the second strike landed, and what I saw in that half second was surprise, pure animal surprise. The way a man looks when his hand goes through what he thought was a solid floor. There was no fear in it. The Hesht do not have the gland for it. There was only the breaking of a pattern, the registering of a thing the brain had not allowed for. I have thought about that look many times since. It is the look the rim gives a man the first time the rim takes something from him. It is the look I must have worn the day the colony lifted off without me. We had given that look to each other now, the Hesht in us. We had taught it back. He dropped. I took his blade. I took his sidearm, a short, ugly thing with a barrel that flared at the end. I took his coil of rope. I took his canteen, which had water in it that wasn't grit. I left his rifle because the rifle was a long-range weapon, and I wasn't going to be doing any long-range fighting. I was going to be doing the other kind. I dragged him into the gravel, and I covered him with rocks. The covering wasn't to hide him. The covering was so the heat sense from a passing rider wouldn't pick him up too soon. I wanted them to think he was still hunting. I wanted them to come looking for him on the assumption that the chase was still going their way. Then I sat with my back against the boulder, and I drank from his canteen, and I started to think. 11 years, a drunk had taken a lot from me, but it hadn't taken the part of me that had been a salvage hand on the trade lanes before I'd come to Bedford Flats. The part that knew what a hunt line looked like. The part that knew how a search pattern works. A salvage hand learns search patterns because a salvage hand spends his working life looking for things that do not want to be found, scrap drifting in cold space, debris with no transponder, the wreck of a ship that went down with all hands and is now a question of mass spread across 1,000 cubic kilometers. You learn the way a search line moves. You learn the gaps in it. You learn that any search pattern, no matter how clever, has one weakness, and the weakness is the assumption that the thing being searched for wants to be found, or wants to escape, or wants anything at all. A thing that does not want is a thing that does not move predictably. A thing that does not want is the worst thing a search line can be asked to find. The Hesht were moving in a fan. 3 riders and 1 walker, probably, with the walker as the flusher and the riders as the line. The line would be sweeping west, expecting me to run. The line would close at the ridge. The line was tight because the prey was supposed to be panicked. I wasn't going to run west anymore. I was going to circle back. I dropped my coat in the gravel about 100 meters west of the boulder, and I weighted it with stones so the wind wouldn't lift it. I poured a little of the dead Hesht's canteen on the coat so it would have moisture for the heat sense to read against the cool gravel. Not warm. I was running too cold for warm to be believable. Just different. Just enough to draw an eye. Then I doubled back east. The night went on a long time. The 2 moons of Bedford Flats wheel slowly. I walked east along the riverbed on the soft places where my boots didn't crunch, and twice I heard the horns, and once I saw a rider pass on the high ground, and both times I went flat, and the heat sense slid past me like a hand over wet glass. I was running cold and I was running mean, and somewhere in the 3rd hour of walking east I realized something else. The shake had stopped, not because the withdrawal was over, because the withdrawal didn't matter anymore. The body knows when there's a fight on. The body shuts down the small fires to feed the big one. My hands were steady on the pipe and on the captured sidearm, and my breath was even, and I was no longer the man who'd answered the lawyer's call. That man was dead in a shack 2 days behind me. The thing walking east along the riverbed was something else, a leftover, a debt being collected. I came back to the town before second sunrise. Bedford Flats was quiet. The festival had emptied the strut. The hooks under the crossbeam were empty too. They were waiting for me. The town's lights were down to running glow. I sat on the ridge above the depot for a long time and I watched. There were Hesht in the town. Not many. Most of them were out on the flats hunting me. But there were guards on the gate and there were watchers on the rooftops, and the watchers had the long rifles. The hunt fathers were out. The keepers were in. I needed to get to the depot. The depot had the comms. The depot had the freighter manifest. The depot had the only thing on the rock that could get me off it. The depot also had Burnside. I waited until the smaller moon set. The light dropped by 1/3. I came down the ridge on my belly, west side, where the watchers couldn't see because the watchers were oriented south toward the flats. I came in along the back of the Wachowski bar, and I crouched against the wall and I listened. Inside the bar, 2 voices were arguing. One was Mickey, one was Charlie. They were talking about me. They were talking in the trade tongue, but their accents had dropped the human drawl. They sounded like Hesht. Charlie said the hunt was taking too long. Mickey said the hunt fathers knew their work. Charlie said the drifter was not running like a normal one. Mickey said that was Junior's problem because Junior had picked him. Junior had picked me. Junior had walked into the bar that night and watched me drink and gone home and put my name on the list. 11 years of nodding at me at the depot. 11 years of small, even white-teeth smiles. I waited until the argument trailed off and Charlie left through the front. Then I went in through the back. Mickey was alone, wiping the counter. He had his prosthetic gloves off. His 4-fingered hands had soft tan dust on the knuckles. He looked up when the back door clicked and his second eyelid snapped open, and then I was on him. I won't tell the whole of it. There are things a man does in a back room with a length of pipe that don't bear retelling. The Hesht make a sound when they die that is not a human sound. It is low and wet and goes on a little after the body has stopped. Mickey made that sound, and then he stopped, and I stood over him in the dim of the bar and I felt nothing. The not feeling was its own kind of warning. I had crossed something a few hours back and I was on the other side of it now, and the other side was a country I had not visited before. I noted the feeling. I did not stop to consider it. The depot was 3 buildings east. I took Mickey's belt rig. He had a comms cuff on it. The cuff was Hesht tissue, a wraparound, and it carried the town channel. I clipped it on. I left the bar by the back door and I went east along the alley. The depot's back door was bolted. I sat against the wall in the dust and I worked at the bolt with the captured tooth blade. The blade was sharp enough to part the bolt's seal. The door eased open. Inside, the depot was dim. The comms board glowed soft green. Burnside was in his office at the back. I could see his shape through the glass partition. He had his hat off and his prosthetic gloves off, and he was reading from a console, slow, the way he did everything. I went in low. I cleared the front room. I cleared the side room. I came up on Burnside's office along the back wall, and I crouched under the partition. I had the captured sidearm in my right hand and the pipe in my left and the tooth blade in my belt, and I was running so cold the heat sense on his board never twitched. Burnside spoke without looking up. "Sit down, Warren." I stopped. He kept his eyes on the console. He turned a page. He said, "The board has been telling me for an hour that something is wrong with my hunters. 2 are not answering. The youngest is dead. The bar comm is silent. I assumed you would come." He looked up. The cold tea eyes met mine over the partition. He was not afraid. The Hesh do not have the gland for it, the freighter pilot had said. They have other glands instead. "Sit down," he said again. I came around the partition and I sat. The sidearm was on him. He did not look at it. "You found out faster than I expected," he said. "You were never going to let me on the freighter." "No." "Why the lawyer?" He blinked, the second lid flickered. "What lawyer?" I told him about the call, the clean office, the plants, the daughter. Burnside considered for a long moment. Then he said, "Ah." It was the first inflection I had ever heard in his voice. "That was a kindness then. We do not arrange those. We let the prey come to us on their own errands. The errand makes the kill clean. The errand is the reason the prey is amoral. The errand is the reason the prey will not be missed." He looked at me almost tenderly. "Your daughter is real, Warren. The mother is real. The mother is dead. The lawyer is real. The lawyer found you because you were findable. You came to the depot for a transit pass, and the transit pass put your name on my list. The hunt does not invent a reason. The hunt waits for a man to give it one." I sat with that. He watched me sit with it. He turned the page on his console, slow, as if his hands needed something to do while my brain caught up. The Hesh do that. They occupy their hands while they speak hard things. The freighter pilot had told me once that it was a courtesy in their language. A man who is delivering bad news with empty hands is a man making a threat. A man who is delivering bad news while doing a small task is a man telling a truth he expects to be received. Burnside had been delivering truths to me my whole 11 years on the rock. I had simply not been listening. He said, "You can put the weapon down. There is no freighter, Warren. There has not been a freighter through Bedford Flats in 11 years. The lane is closed. We closed it. The transit pass was the bait. There is no exit from this rock. You are going to die in this office or you are going to die on the strut. You may choose which. I will not lie about that to you. The hunt does not lie to the meat at the end." I asked him a question I had not planned to ask. "How many of us are left?" He did not pretend not to understand. He looked at his console. He said, 11, you make 12. We take 1 a season. We have 11 seasons of stock remaining. 11. 11 humans on a rock that had once held 900. 11 walking around drinking in bars and nodding at deputies, and lining up for festivals because they did not want to know. I had been one of them an hour ago. The old man at the counter, the one with the bag still by the door, had been telling me his name and the names of every man and woman left, and I had been too drunk and too tired and too far gone to hear what was in his voice. The shame of that sat in my chest under the sidearm and the captured blade and the cold I was running in my bones. The shame was a warm thing. The shame was the warmest thing I had felt in 2 days. I asked him another thing. "The kids in the strut yesterday, with the carved figures." He nodded. "Calves. They are learning to know the prey by shape. Yours was among them. We carve a likeness of each before the hunt." I shot him in the chest. The sidearm was a Hesh weapon, and I had not fired one before. The recoil was wrong, a sideways jolt instead of a backward one. The slug went in under the collarbone and out the back of his chair and into the wall behind him. Burnside looked down at his chest. His second eyelid flickered once. He looked up at me and he said, in the same flat voice he had used for 11 years of paperwork, "The calf was a good likeness." Then his head went down on the console and he did not move again. I stood up. I was shaking, but not from withdrawal. I let the shake move through me and out. I went around the desk and I took his cuff and his keys and his sidearm, a larger one than Mickey's, longer barrel, and I went to the comms board. The comms board had the town channel and the rim channel and a third channel I had not seen before. The third channel was labeled in the curling segmented script. I did not need to read it to know what it was. It was the Hecht clan channel. The Hunt fathers were on the flats and they were talking to each other and Burnside had been listening. I sat down at the board. Here is the thing about a depot comms on a frontier moon. The comms is built to broadcast on every channel at once in case of emergency. Salvage code, distress code. It is a colony failsafe from the old days. The Hecht had kept the depot running because the depot was their watch post. They had not stripped the failsafe because the failsafe had nothing to do with the hunt. The failsafe was for a colony that no longer existed. I keyed every channel. I broadcast on the town channel and the rim channel and the Hecht clan channel. I broadcast on the colony emergency band that no human ear had listened to in 11 years. I broadcast a recording, not my voice, Burnside's voice, which the board had on file from 1,000 routine transits. I cued his voice from the archive. I had the board read out in his flat, dispassionate cadence the entire roster of the season's hunt. Names, dates, locations. The list of the 11 humans dead. The list of the 11 humans still alive on the moon. The festival ceremonies, the carving of the calves, the hooks, the Hunt Fathers clan markings, each one named. I let it run. I let it loop. I set the board to repeat the broadcast until the power core gave out, which would be about 90 standard hours, and I jammed the override. The rim channel reaches 3 lanes. The colony emergency band reaches everywhere a human ear is still listening. Somewhere out there a freighter pilot or a fleet picket or a relay tech was going to hear that broadcast on a channel they hadn't checked in a decade, and they were going to check it because the failsafe doesn't lie. The failsafe is for real. I did not know if anyone would come. I did not believe anyone would come. The fleet had left us behind 11 years ago, and the fleet does not come back for the ones it left. But the broadcast was out there now, and it could not be unsent, and that was enough. The Hecht had built their hunt on quiet, on a rock at the rim where no one was listening. I had taken the quiet from them. Whatever else happened, the quiet was gone. I left the depot before the town channel could call its watchers in. I crossed the strut in the gray hour before sunrise. The hooks under the crossbeam swayed slightly in the wind. The carved figure of me was probably in some Hecht child's hands, sleeping. I did not look at the structure long. I went to the western gate and I shot the watcher on the rooftop with Burnside's sidearm, and the shot was loud and the watcher fell into the dust, and the town started to wake up. I had the watcher's long rifle by the time the first Hunt father came in off the flats. He came on his 6-legged mount at a hard gallop. He had heard the broadcast. He had heard his own clan markings named on the rim channel. He came to the depot to silence the board, and instead he came around the depot corner into me and into the long rifle, and I shot him off his mount at 30 meters. The mount kept running. The Hunt father lay in the strut with a hole through his chest plate and his second eyelid open to the sky. I took his rifle too. I had 3 weapons now. I had a position on the rooftop. I had a town channel cuff that was telling me where the other hunters were because they were calling into a sheriff who was not answering. I had the high ground and I had the cold, and I had the long hours of a moon that did not care. The other 2 came in within the hour. Both at once, from different angles, which was the Hunt father formation for converging on a wounded animal. They were not expecting return fire from a rooftop. They were not expecting a man who was supposed to be dying in the gravel 2 days west to be holding a position in the strut with a rifle on each shoulder. The first one I dropped at the depot corner the same way I had dropped the first. The second got off a shot that took a chunk of the rooftop 2 meters from my hip. I felt the heat of it on my cheek. I did not flinch. The shake was gone. I had nothing left to shake with. I shot him from the prone position as he came around the watchtower. He fell over the rail of his mount and his foot caught in the stirrup, and the mount dragged him out of the strut and into the flats, and I did not see him again. Junior was the last. Junior came on foot. He came down the strut with his hands open and his small, even white teeth grin in place, and he was holding my pistol, the one he had taken from the duffel, the one my brother had left me. He stopped 20 meters from the depot wall. He looked up at the rooftop. He had to know I was there. The town channel had been calling for him for an hour. "Warren," he called up, "you are not what we thought you were." I did not answer. "We have hunted your kind for a long time," he said. "We have hunted you on 12 worlds. You always run warm, you always run loud, you always run for something. The mother, the calf, the bottle. You run and we read you and we close and the hunt ends. This is a thing my fathers taught me. This is a thing their fathers taught them." He took a step toward the depot. "You did not run warm," he said. "You did not run loud, you ran for nothing. You broke our pattern, Drifter. I would like to know how." I lined the long rifle on the bridge of his nose. He saw the movement. He did not stop walking. "Tell me how," he said, "and I will let you take the freighter. I will open the lane, I will give you the rim. There is no shame in that bargain. The Hunt Fathers will name you in the songs. The calves will carve you twice. Tell me, Warren, how does a man run cold?" I let him take one more step. I let him take it because I wanted him to hear what I was going to say. The town channel was open on the cuff at my wrist. The clan channel was open too. The rim band and the emergency band were both still broadcasting Burnside's voice in a loop. Whatever I said was going out to every heshed ear within 3 lanes. I said by being already dead, by having nothing left for you to take, by being the kind of broken your hunt was never built to read. We have a long history of being the wrong shape, Junior. We have been hunted before. We have been hunted by our own. We learned. You did not. He started to raise the pistol. I shot him through the bridge of his nose with the long rifle, and he went down in the dust, and his small, even white teeth came apart on the impact, and my brother's pistol slid out of his hand and into the orange dust of the strut. I climbed down off the rooftop a little while later. The town was very quiet. The watchers on the other rooftops had not fired. They were watching me cross the strut with 2 rifles slung and a sidearm in my belt and a length of pipe in my hand, and they did not fire. They had heard the broadcast. They had heard their sheriff's voice nomming their hunt on every band a human ear could reach. They had heard their clan markings spoken on the rim channel. They were waiting. I went to the carving stall in the corner of the strut. There were rows of small carved figures laid out on a cloth. The figures had 2 legs and they were rough and they were unmistakably the shape of human beings. I found mine. The carving was crude, a thin man with a duffel and a downturned mouth. The maker had given me a beard I did not have. I put the carving in my pocket. I walked to the hotel and I went to my room. The duffel was where I had left it. The pills were gone. The pistol was on the strut where Junior had dropped it. I picked up the duffel and I walked out of the hotel and I walked across the strut and I picked up my brother's pistol from the dust and I cleaned it on my coat and I put it in the duffel and I walked out the western gate of Bedford Flats and I started for the ridge. The Hesht let me go. I do not know if they were afraid or if they were waiting for orders from a clan father who would never give them. I do not know if they thought I was a curse or if they thought I was a sign. I do not think they knew themselves. They had built their hunt on a story about what we were, and the story had broken in the strut, and they did not have another story ready. I crossed the ridge before sundown. There was a cistern in the foothills on the other side. There was the wreck of an old colony survey vehicle in a gulch a day's walk west. I knew because the depot maps had shown me. The survey vehicle had a long-range comm that might still work. The survey vehicle had a fuel cell that might still hold a charge. The survey vehicle was 40 years old and it had been built by humans, which meant it had been built badly and stubbornly, and to last. I walked toward the gulch in the silver light of the second moon coming up. My boots were splitting at the toe. My coat was stiff with what I did not look down to identify. The shake came back in waves, harder now, because the fight was done and the body was sending the bill. Twice I lay down in the gravel, and the gravel was warm from the day's sun, and the warmth was the first kind thing I had felt in 3 days. And twice I told myself if I lay there one more minute I would not stand up, and twice I stood up. There is a moment in withdrawal where the brain offers a man a very reasonable case for lying down. The case is well argued. The case has footnotes. The trick is to not argue back. The trick is to stand up before the case is finished. The relief ship found me on the 8th day. They had heard the broadcast. They had not believed it at first. The colony emergency band had been silent so long that the relay tech who caught it ran it through 3 diagnostic loops before he forwarded it. Then they sent a picket. The picket sent a frigate. The frigate sent a shuttle down to the gulch where my survey vehicle's beacon was pulsing on the long-range comm, weak but steady, on a fuel cell I had pulled out of the vehicle and patched with wire from my belt. The shuttle door opened, and a young woman in a fleet jumpsuit stepped down and looked at me and said, "Mr. Novick." I had not heard my name spoken in a human voice in 11 years. I nodded. She said, "We have your daughter. She is on the inner rim. She has been waiting." I did not answer for a long moment. The shake was back in my hands, the old shake, the withdrawal shake, the one I had thought I was done with. The body remembers. The body comes back to itself when the fight is over and asks for its bill. I held my hands in front of me, and I watched them shake. "Take me to her," I said. The fleet went back to Bedford Flats 2 weeks later with 3 frigates and a marine company. I was not on that mission. I was on a quiet station near the inner rim, in a small room with a window, learning how to be in a room with a window. My daughter visited me on the 3rd day. She had her mother's eyes and a quiet way of looking at a man that did not ask him to be anything in particular. She brought me a drawing she had made of a horse, because she had been told her father was from a frontier moon, and she had assumed there were horses there. I told her there were not horses. I told her there were other things. I did not tell her what the other things were. The fleet brief came back 6 weeks after that. The Hecht clan on Bedford Flats had not resisted. They had surrendered the moon to a colonial council I did not know the name of. The 11 surviving humans had been evacuated. The hooks under the crossbeam had been taken down. The carving stall had been emptied. I asked the colonel who brought the brief what they had done with the carvings. He looked at me a moment and said, "Burned, Mr. Novick, all of them." I thanked him and he left. I kept the one I had taken. The thin man with the duffel and the beard I do not have. It sits on the shelf in the room with the window. My daughter has asked me twice what it is. Both times I have told her it is a man I used to know. She is 12 now. She is taller. She still draws horses. She still has her mother's eyes. I do not drink any more. I take the pills the station doctor gives me for the shake. The shake is smaller than it was. Some nights it is gone. Most nights it is not. I sit by the window in the small hours and I look out at the rim and I think about Junior Wachowski asking me how a man runs cold, and I think about the answer I gave him, and I think it was the truest thing I have ever said. The Hecht hunted us because we were warm. They hunted us because we ran loud and ran for something and ran the way they expected. They had a long story about us, written across 100 generations, and the story said we were the kind of meat that broke on schedule. We broke. They were right about that. We broke 100 ways on 100 worlds. What their story did not have in it was the part where the broken thing keeps moving. The part where a man who has nothing left, who has poisoned himself half to death, who has buried every clean thing in him under 11 years of dust and grain alcohol, who has been left behind by his own people and forgotten by his own blood, That man, that thing, that leftover, is still capable of standing up in the gravel and walking east when the horns are coming from the west. We are the worst meat in the rim. I want them to remember that. I want every clan father out there in the dark to put it in their next song. The humans are the worst meat. We taste of rot and we run cold and we will not die on your schedule. My daughter is asleep down the hall. The window shows me the second moon coming up over the rim, the way it used to come up over the ridge at Bedford Flats. The light is the same. The man watching it is not. I have nothing left to add to that.